A session on what have come to be called the one-eye integration techniques. I'm Rick Bradshaw. This is Audrey Cook. We'll be presenting and facilitating, and we'll be showing you a little video clip, at least one, and maybe some more, depending on what you are interested in and that kind of thing. And we'll be doing some experiential work probably in triads. So you get a chance to try some of the techniques and learn a couple of the simplest ones today. And we'll be going over a little bit about where the techniques came from and how we use them, because we work with different client populations. I tend to work more with university population and EAP, Employee Assistance Programs. Audrey works a lot more with First Nations, multi-generational abuse, a lot of dissociation. So depending on your client group, I think we can pretty well cover the board as far as relevant information for you.
Since we have such a small group, I'm hoping that we can find out more about you guys. And how many people here are therapists? And and how many are educators? Who didn't I hit? You're a student. And you're a student too?
Student to be a therapist or student to be an educator or?
Student to be a therapist.
Okay.
And?
Great.
Student to be a therapist.
Okay. Great. Awesome. Well, it's great to be here, and I think you will get some very relevant and exciting tools, at least to get an introduction to an exploration of these. And we have a book that we've co-written called Toward Integration, One Eye at a Time. It's at the book table. Shameless promotion right off the top. But if you want more information and you want to see sort of step-by-step and photos and flow charts and case examples and that kind of thing, that's where that sort of more information would be located. In our handout, what we've got is an overview of some of the different ways that we've used these techniques. And so perhaps what we should do is just get started with, maybe Audrey could speak to where you started to come up with the one-eye techniques. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, about 7 or 8 years ago, I and Rick both were trained in EMDR. And how many people use EMDR? Yeah, you can't hear me? Okay. How about if I speak about this level? Yeah, there's lots of space. How many people know what EMDR is? Okay, so EMDR is a therapeutic technique that, in the old days at least, it was an eye movement technique to help people move out of stuck states, traumatic states, and turn traumas into memories. The idea was that when somebody is caught up and stuck in a traumatic event, that they can't function with that. It's just isolated and stuck, and they can't not move forward in their lives. So the idea was not to get rid of people's memories, but to turn traumatic events and traumatic memories into simple memories. So they put it behind them, and it becomes something bad that happened rather than something that's an ongoing event that's present, that's affecting them now. And it was the best tool I'd ever learned. I'm an old Ericksonian hypnotherapist. I did NLP. I've always been interested in experiencing the emotion, the physicality, as opposed to just talking about an experience. It was a real event, and I worked with that. But EMDR gave me a wonderful tool that help people move forward. The problem with it, I work with a very upset and distressed population, by and large, and they were blown away by EMDR. I don't know if you've heard that before, but EMDR is a great tool to use for what it was designed for, and that was single incident trauma. So if you had come from a pretty happy background and you were moving through your life and then something bad happened to you, well, EMDR was like magic. I don't know if anyone's had the experience of using EMDR with somebody who had happened to have a single incident trauma in their life. I met one once. And she walked out of my office after an hour she changed her life. And it was great. But that's not who I work with. I work with people who suffered neglect and abuse and multi-generational loss of culture and multi-generational loss of community, to the point where EMDR was dangerous to them. So I had to find a way of slowing that process down. And because I have quite a severe learning disability, I had many years before this learned about educational kinesiology. Does anybody know EK? Well, there are certain parts of EK that had worked very well for me. The part that had worked best for me was the integrating of the two hemispheres of the brain. And I would never in the past have gone into a situation like this without doing some simple cross crawl, which would help me feel more solid, more connected. So the idea of getting the two hemispheres of the brain together really made a lot of sense to me. And so it wasn't a big jump from there to what is my experience and what is my experience. Trying to bring the two experiences together. See, some of these ideas can be kind of strange for people, but it has really helped me personally a lot, and it's helped me as a therapist tremendously. The idea is not to make complex situations simple. And just before you guys came in, I was talking to Rick about something that happened with a neighbor of mine. She was trying to figure out whether or not to buy a new car. Single parent, 2 kids. This was a big event for her. She was going to buy a new car for the first time in her life. She was struggling with this. She was giving herself headaches over this decision. And we were out for a walk, and she wanted to go home. And it was a beautiful day, and I was going to miss her companionship, and I said, well, can I just try something with you? Although I'm not your therapist, you're my friend, I'd just like to see how this works for you. And I asked her to hold the idea of whether she should buy this car in her mind and to cover her left eye. And what she got was, yes, I really want it. And then she switched eyes and she got a lot of fear and anxiety. So what was happening, she was getting no and yes. That wasn't working for her. Because this is a very complex decision whether to buy a vehicle. And what she was, the object wasn't to come up with the answer of whether she should buy the car. The object was to integrate the process of making that decision. And so what we did is we went back and forth until it was exciting and fearful, exciting and fearful. The headache went away. And she was able to make a decision based, this is a complex decision. But she was no longer fighting herself. And she was no longer struggling with herself as to whether or not she should buy this vehicle. She just made a decision based on a whole lot of factors. A decision she wasn't able to make before because she wasn't able to step back from her experience and see what was going on inside of herself. So she was alternating between excitement and fear, as opposed to seeing that as a complex. She was able to use a rational thought after that. and she loves her car. And it works great for her. She goes on long holidays with her kids, and it's a big decision, but it worked for her. But she couldn't get to that place as long as she was vacillating and making herself sick with it.
So often people are traumatized by an event, and it could be a relationship trauma or betrayal or abandonment, and it could be something that happened really in the first 4 or 5 years of life, or it could be something that happened last month kind of thing. And those traumas seem to prevent some of the processing of that the set of experiences in a bigger way. It gets stuck. It's just blocked or stuck, and it has a lot of intensity, but it's very hard for someone to reflect on it, to stand back from it and see both sides of it, or see themselves from outside the feelings. An example, I was just working with a young woman recently who has MS and a bunch of other physical things going on, and she had her mother die when she was 12. She had been unable to even think about her mother, unable to even mention her mother's name without bursting into tears and being completely overwhelmed. And so in that state, she's unable to even reflect on her relationship with her mother and get the benefit of that and think about the good times. And she was unable to connect with her mother's family, the aunts and the relatives, and get the support of those people. And she was unable to connect with her own brother, and get together and watch the videos of her mother and that kind of thing. She was unable to approach any of that. It was just too intense. And in a couple of sessions where we used these one-eye techniques, it completely cleared a lot of the intensity that was previously preventing her from even reflecting on that. And she was able to meet with her brother, and they watched home movies of her mother. She was able to go to her aunt and her family's places for special events and dinners and talk to them. She was able to ask questions about her mother. She was able to go into her attic and pick up the clothes that her mother had been wearing the last time she saw her and go through them. And obviously that's an important addition to her life process, that ability to be able to go into that experience as opposed to being afraid to go there and completely overwhelmed by it. And subsequently we processed some other traumas. She had a rape trauma when she was 7. And she'd had urinary incontinence for 20 years. As a result of that, in 2 sessions working with the one-eye techniques, that went away. And it's, this is like a month or 2 ago. So it's not like a 3-year study or something. But I mean, major things can happen when someone can integrate some of these traumas in their lives. And I think it's really important to recognize that the traumas aren't always being hit by a bus on the corner of a street. A lot of times it's relationship traumas, which then interfere with current relationships and even future relationships, and trust of one's own judgment in selecting, associations and partners and that kind of thing.
Can I just tell that?
Yeah, please.
I know it works. For some people in this room, you've heard about differences, or you've heard about the hemispheres being different, and for other people, it's like a bizarre concept to think that if you cover one of your eyes, you're going to have a different experience with the other. And in a few minutes, we'll give you the opportunity to experience that yourself, that there really is a difference. And it's funny to me because many years ago when we were starting this process, I wasn't sure if it was real either. It's like, am I making this up? Is this happening because I'm expecting it to happen, or what's going on? But over the years now, we've been addressing groups of people, and it's, by and large, people have the same experience. They have the same experience that I have and that my clients have, is that there's a real difference. When you're thinking about something that's distressing, not overly distressing, but distressing, say, at a medium level, and you cover one of your eyes, and you sit with your experience of that, it's different. Now, whether that's something that you have a personal experience of today or not, I don't know. But that's the first question. The second question is, what do you do with that, and how useful is that, and what do we make of that if it's true? And we'll go into some of the neurology, which is all information that we didn't have 8 years ago, but we're starting to make sense of our experience of there's a difference. What do we do with that? What meaning do we give to that, and how useful is it? Anyway, I wanted to tell you a short story of something that happened. I was at a retreat, a women's retreat, some months ago, and I met a woman who was about my age, and she looked kind of down. And we got talking, and she had told me that her husband had left her, and he left her for another woman, and that I thought, oh, she's really feeling down about that, and we got talking about that. And then over a course of a few minutes, it came out that her husband had left her 14 years ago. 14 years. I thought, oh, here's a mother with young kids, and her kids were now adults. And her husband had left her for a woman who he married and stayed with for the last 15 years. So here was, all of a sudden I had a different picture. So what I did, I said, you know, I'm not your therapist, and this is a retreat, and we're not doing therapy here, but I'd like to show you, if you're interested in something that has helped a lot of people, and you might find it interesting. So I said to her, please cover your left eye. Can you believe he would do that to you? And she looked at me and said, no, I can't. I can't believe that he would do that. And switch eyes. Can you believe that he would do that? And she said, well, yeah. I can believe that he would do that. I didn't like it. I wish he didn't. I think it was a very poor choice, but I can't believe he did that. And we went back and forth until she could believe that he would do that. Secondly, can she believe that she would choose a man to marry who would do that to her? Back and forth. And it was about 10, 15 minutes. This is a very high-functioning person, other than this particular little issue that she was stuck on. She said, you could see it in her eyes. She laughed. She says, that's really amazing. I say 100 times a day, you cannot heal what you can't believe. If you can't believe that something's happened in your life, you can't get over it. People can say, get over it, what's your problem? But if you can't truly believe that something's happened to you, whether it's something really horrendous, like a childhood assault, or whether it's a betrayal of a colleague, if you can't believe that they would really do that, and you're still engaged with trying to make sense of it at some subliminal level, I don't think you can get over it. That's my honest belief. You may have a different one. But from a neurological point of view, now that we're starting to grasp what does this mean in terms of covering an eye, it's starting to make some sense to me that we get stuck. Not because we're not smart people or good people, but because we get stuck, because we have no way of processing a piece of information. We're at some level of shock. I think that that's what we're seeing here is shock.
So another way to use this technique is to explore things like procrastination and looking at relationships, even therapeutic relationships. I start sometimes now my therapy sessions by having the client, if I have any sense at all that the person has difficulty doing some trust, what I do is I'll start having the client cover one of the eyes and just look at me as a person. See, just get a sense of how trustworthy you feel that I am. Just a sense.
Really?
And then cover the other eye, and what do you get? And I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen someone, get a fairly different experience. On one side it's like, I don't know, like they see my face differently. They see my face as being maybe critical or somewhat cold or judging or something. And then the other side, it's like warm, inviting, Yes, totally trust you, open. And then as we switch back and forth, the person gets to the point where they basically dissolve that other piece. And in extreme cases, we're working with DID patients, dissociative identity disorder. I've seen stuff where people will even see physical differences, where like I'll be bigger on one side and then little on the other side, and color on one and black and white on the other. So really some major stuff. And then it equalizes, like literally the size increases as you switch. And it's not even evenly increasing. It's like now your head's bigger, but the rest of your body's small. And then you switch again, and okay, your head and your up to your waist is bigger. You know, now does that happen with the average client that walks in? No, but I'm saying there are some pretty amazing things that are happening as a result of this integrative process. I just finished a whole literature review of some of the major things, major findings related to neurobiology of trauma and traumatic processing, and some of the literature on processing that seems to be relevant or likely relevant to these techniques. A fellow by the name of Frederick Schiffer, who's a Harvard psychiatrist, came out with a book the year before we put out the book that we did, and it wasn't that we saw his stuff and then started copying it. You know, Audrey was working with those techniques, and we just checked the internet to see, is anybody else doing anything with one eye at a time with trauma? And up came his name, and he has this book. But it's a great read if you want to take a look at a book. Of Two Minds, it's called. Of Two Minds. It's about dual brain psychology. And about half the book is sort of a neuropsych, you know, looking at post-commissurotomy patients where they split the corpus callosum, and so you have the two hemispheres functioning independently and that kind of thing. And the other half, or a little more than half, is clinical examples. You know, a client that's depressed, a client that has PTSD, a client that has different anxiety disorders, or that sort of thing, and the differences and the experiences. But these techniques are slightly different from what he does, and certainly they're additional. Yeah.
He looks at the periphery of the eye. He's looking at this and this. And he wouldn't, I don't believe at least, that he would see that there was much use in doing this.
Yeah.
And he's looking at a very small part of the eye, the periphery and the periphery, covering all.
Yeah, so he uses glasses or goggles, you know, with everything except the outer third of each eye covered, and so switches the goggles, or sometimes in the studies they've used contact lenses that are blacked out, everything except that little portion. In our experience, even though both eyes have connections to both hemispheres, we find we see quite significant differences between the eyes. Sometimes someone will have a high level of disturbance with either eye. So if you're rating from 0 to 10 in intensity, they'll have maybe a 9 on one and a 10 on the other, that kind of thing. And if it's very high on both sides, I usually get clients to do rapid switching, switch back and forth about every second or half second, and often that'll bring it down to the level where one side is sort of higher and they can stay there and feel it and that kind of thing. But part of the way it's been used, I have a colleague that I showed some of these techniques to, and he was, for quite a while, the only thing he was doing, the only thing he was using this for in therapy was just having clients experience their states, whatever it was, depression, anxiety, and just notice that they had a different experience depending on which eye they covered. Just stay there and notice what you feel, notice how you're thinking about yourself and the situation and that person, and notice where you feel it in your body. Just doing that process sort of breaks that little set that says all of me is overwhelmed by this. Like, I am these feelings, I am these physical sensations, I am this perspective. It breaks the person out of that so they can realize, hey, I have a couple of things going on. Part of me isn't overwhelmed by this. Part of me can stand right outside this.
And look at the therapeutic and the meaning of that as a human being. That if someone feels totally connected and totally overwhelmed, or even, this is how I feel about that other person, or this thing that happened to me, and then they find that there's in fact three things going on here. There's the observer watching this distress and this fairly analytical approach. All of a sudden you're getting a different take on the meaning of that event becomes quite different. And you're feeling yourself, even if you don't want to do anything with that, even if you're not trying to fix that in any way, you have a different sense of yourself involved with that experience.
So maybe before we go further, we can just define what are the
Or
one-eye
maybe people can
integration
try-
techniques.
Maybe people can try this to see if...
Do you want to try and maybe do that
think
first?
so.
Okay, okay. Maybe just where you're sitting, just individually?
Yeah. Would you be into trying it?
Okay. Just a couple of...
People who've just walked in,
yeah.
what we're doing is talking about a series of techniques of self-exploration and use in clinical settings, of examining the different experiences people have as they cover one of their eyes and the other one of their eyes, which is kind of odd, and seeing if there is a different experience people have. Most people who have never heard about this think, well, why would that be? That's what I thought at one time too. Why would that be? But in fact, now we're starting to understand why that is, as we understand more about the neurology of that. But
Yeah.
first of all, just having an experience of something can be very helpful.
Before we give you the experience, we should do a few cautionary notes.
Yes.
If you feel sort of somewhat vulnerable today, depending on the day, and sometimes you feel a little shaken, you know, you've had a near car accident on the way here, and you've got some major life crises right in the middle of occurring or whatever, it might be best to save it for another day. Another thing that occurs occasionally is after one or two switches, sometimes you get what we call dissociative or neurological artifacts. So that would include things like headaches, pressure, you know, in the front or the back of the head, occasionally even visual distortions, where one part of one or both eyes gets blacked out, or little black blobs or gray blobs. I'm not trying to freak you out. I mean, these things fade off if you just take your hands off your eyes and they'll go away. But just to prepare you, because I've had a few training seminars where I've had people just get going and get started, and you know, I didn't mention that, and they're like too freaked out to even mention that they're getting the black blobs or something. It's like, whoa, this is too weird. I'm not even going to say about what's going on, because I might get hospitalized or something, you know, I might get...
Where's the net?
Yeah, you know. But if you're going to do some switching, the idea is to pick something that's not your life issue. You know, not something that every time you think about it, you feel like you're going to, you know, have to find the washroom or something. You want to pick something that's maybe a level of a 5 out of 10. If you have 0 to 10, something that might be a little disturbing, something that might be a little bothering you as you think about it. But the issue is to think about something that bothers you when you think about it now.
Right.
Not just something that bothered you back then, but when you think about it now, nothing, no problem. So the issue is just notice. Because this is what we say to our clients.
Just notice that.
It's like, be curious about it. I wonder if I'll feel and think the same way about this if I try this with one eye covered. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, like I have different sight in each of my eyes.
That's a good question.
So that is it still going to be individualistic for me, or will that, what is the
In our experience, it doesn't make a difference, you know, like slight variations, you know, nearsightedness, farsightedness, that kind of thing. The only time it starts to fall down, basically, is when the person can't perceive light and track objects through the visual field in one or both eyes. That's where you sort of fall down. Unlike EMDR, you can do with hand tapping or audio tones. With this one, you basically have to look at with one eye, and then some of the other techniques involve tracking, objects through the visual field. What you may want to do when you start the covering is cover your left eye. Most of you are probably right-handed. This is just my own experience. Different people get different experience. As a therapist, how many thousand hours? I figure about 10,000 hours I've logged using this technique. Most people that are right-hand dominant tend to get more intensity in a traumatic memory with the right eye open and less with the left. But obviously, if you're left-handed or ambidextrous, that changes, and different people, even if they are right-handed, might be reversed in hemispheric dominance. But it's just something to try. Sometimes we get people to try covering their left eye first, notice what you feel physically and emotionally, and then switch. The only thing to keep in mind is when you switch, wait a minute. Like, don't expect, like, as soon as you switch, it immediately changes, like instant. For some people it does, right, because the intensity of their feelings warrants that. But for other times where it's something a little bit milder, it's sort of like a P&E ride. If they were to shut the ride off, it wouldn't just come to a screeching halt. It would sort of whir its way down until it kind of wound down. And in my experience, and I don't know your experience too, Audrey, that when you switch, it takes just 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or a little less sometimes, before you notice the difference. So do we have any questions about this exercise? Any questions about the process? Any questions about, yeah.
So when you're covering your eye, you're just thinking about the situation or the issue or whatever it is that you're saying to choose to block it.
Yeah. And
just hold that in your mind.
that's right. So the first thing you do is, before you cover your eyes at all, just at least think about it enough that you can kind of feel it a little bit. And the places most people tend to feel it, in my experience, throat, chest, or stomach, usually. Like their breathing gets a little bit tighter, or their heartbeat goes up a little, or their stomach feels a little tight or queasy or that kind of thing, or a little bit of constriction in the throat. So you may want to just start by noticing that before you even do an eye covering. And if it's a person, like if it was a personal event, then what I try to get people to do is to think about the tone of voice and the facial expression, or even the attitude of the person when they're doing whatever it was that most disturbs you. Because that's an easy way to focus it. So then you're not just sort of vaguely thinking about that person, but just specific tone of voice, facial expression. So what we can do, and again, no one's obligated to do this, okay? This is just something, if you're interested in exploring this, you can just try covering and notice what you get. Obviously, if someone isn't traumatized by an event, then they probably won't get much. They really won't get much difference. And the other thing, and we'll show you a little video clip, that sometimes the stuff is intense and you've blocked it out. You can't believe it on one or both sides. We did a training workshop, the EMDR one, soon after the 9/11 disaster, and people were working with that. Not that they were victims of it, but they were in Vancouver and they had just seen it and were just blown away by it. And they were doing the switching in their triads, and a number of them just couldn't believe it. It's like, this cannot happen, this did not happen. They saw it happen on the TV screen and stuff, but part of them just did not get it, and the other part did. And so when they're switching, basically it came to the place where they could see it, believe it, and move on. So maybe we just give you a few minutes to give that a try.
Yeah.
Sound okay? If you want to. If you don't want to, read the handout.
Take off your glasses, otherwise you'll be
take your glasses off. The other thing I try to get people to do is, when you cover, use the heel of your hand right here up against your nose, so that you totally cover, like don't let any light in. You can leave your eye open under it, but just block out the light. The other thing is, don't stay too long if there's a high intensity on either eye. Okay, you want to switch away from that. Don't stay there, because it tends to go up the longer you stay with one hand on. Okay.
Just asking. Just asking anyone else who would like to talk. Okay, so some of you will have found a difference and other ones will have not. Does anyone want to tell us about any differences they saw? It's interesting.
And then also as my eyesight became clearer, an underlying question came out that I was totally different
On the visual?
I didn't really focus on the visual, but more, I feel that in different arts, when you come to different arts, I have different dialogue myself.
That's very common.
Yeah.
Did people hear that? She's saying that she was concentrating on the visual, but in fact she noticed that she was having different dialogue or different thoughts, different ways of expressing those thoughts, using different words or different intonation. In other words, you're having a different experience. So that's very common. Some people it's very subtle. I do this on my own a lot. So I've gotten pretty good at noticing subtle differences. It's very helpful. Sometimes when I'm upset about something and I cover one of my eyes, I'll find that my stomach's a little tight. And then I'll switch over here and I'll find my throat's a little tight. Is there meaning in that? Well, if I go back, and if I choose to, I can go back and forth and find that I feel more connected. I actually feel more connected to myself, which is helpful in and of itself.
So whatever comes, we can use that.
Yeah.
Whatever comes
Any
up, you can
difference.
use it, exactly.
Yeah.
Or not,
Yeah.
if you choose.
Yeah.
When it comes to our own exploration, we don't always want to change anything. Sometimes it's just noticing the process.
I think,
It maybe mean at this particular time, there's nothing that you've chosen to bring up that stirs you up in that particular way. And I have worked with some people who do not have differences. That's a very small number, though. That in all the work that we've done together over time, they don't find any difference. That'd be less than less. I don't know. I think people are different. I think that we all have brains, but our brains are different. And I don't think that it's useful to try to fit everybody into a little spot. I think that we're different. This is just one way of exploring people's experience, which we have found very, very helpful
yeah.
over time.
So when you don't notice the difference, do you stop the movement? Or do you keep using it anyway?
As a therapist, if I'm working with somebody who's not finding a difference, I'm looking at a whole lot more than their own experience. I'm watching them and I'm looking at, what do you call these things?
What, glitches? Or intensity mark?
Intensity markers.
Yeah.
That's not the language I use in my thinking, but that's what Rick does. He's looking for changes of coloration around the face. He's looking for, I'm looking more for movement of an eye or something like that, where he looks more for a whole lot of different bodies. I'm looking for postural changes, movement.
Yeah.
And
I always watch breathing.
oh yeah.
So often
Tight.
people will be doing things like they'll hold their breath on one side and the other side they'll sort of sigh. As soon as, as they go over, they go, and they start breathing, and they're not even aware of it, right? And so that's why sometimes it's really good, like in therapy, because you've got someone who's observing you and sees differences you can't even see. I've had people who cry, like pour tears out of one eye and
Unusual.
totally dry on the other side. And as they switch, the emotion comes in the other side and they cry out of both eyes. And just to answer, like address another thing about your question about, does it mean it won't work or they don't have a difference? If someone describes to me an event that I believe would probably cause anyone trauma, and they say, I don't feel a thing, I start to go, I wonder if there's some of that sort of shock denial stuff. I don't mean consciously denying it, just not trying to think about it. I mean it's just like shocked. I remember working with a woman on an automobile accident, and the car had rolled sideways over a cliff and was sort of hanging on a chain link fence. Nobody was in a seatbelt. And we went one side, what do you get? And anxious and stuff. And the other side, what do you get? I'm dead. And this is like a bright, articulate woman, right? And it's like, what? I'm dead. Because part of her just said, this is too bad, I'm going to die, and I don't want to be there when it happens, and just shut down at that level of intensity. and then as we did the switching, came back in and connected to that. So I always look at what's the event. Obviously, clients don't always have to tell you or describe what they're focusing on, which is one of the beautiful things about the therapy, because you can do the whole therapy without having someone tell you. But if they do tell you the event that they're focusing on, and it seems to you like, well, just about anybody who experienced that would probably have a heck of a lot of intensity, and they're not getting it, and you start to you do more of the techniques that relate to breaking through the dissociation. And we may or may not show you some of those today, but one of them is just asking the question, can you believe it? Can you believe that happened? Right down to, can you believe you were there? Can you see yourself in the room? What time of day was it? Where was so-and-so standing? How did they tell you? Where were they in? You just hold your head still and show me where in the room your eyes were at that time, that sort of thing. So you get them to walk through it in a more detailed way, and often that dissociative kind of blocking thing breaks down. Can I just give one
I was just thinking of, I work with children. I'm a marriage and family therapist. And one of the things that I do with little kids, they don't have a lot of words for their experience, but I'll say to them, cover one of your eyes. Is mommy the boss of you? Does mommy have a right to tell you what to do? Do you trust her? Will you follow her? Will you let her teach you? Discipline. I can't get to be the one who tells me what to do if I can't give someone else the right to tell me what to do when I'm younger, right? Because we learn self-discipline, I believe at least, we learn self-discipline by being disciplined. We need to be able to say no to ourselves, and that's not going to come unless we've been able to hear no from someone else and believe it and go through the grief of being told no. That you're not going to get that ice cream cone no matter what you do. Fight and I'll fight and I'll fight, and at a certain point I'll get that the answer is no. And then I can feel sad and bad if I can believe that mommy is in fact saying no. Am I losing people? Does this make sense to you? For people working with kids, it's just, can you believe the answer is no, so they can relax and let it go and move on. Because otherwise they go on and on and on. And I've said this even to my own kid. Can you believe I'm saying no about this? No. Can you believe I'm saying no about this? And back and forth, because sometimes it's really hard to accept that no matter what I say, no matter what I do, no matter how I argue with you, the answer is going to be no. And then I can feel sad and bad, and then I can get on with being a kid again, because that's just how it is.
Yeah. And the other thing in terms of the no difference, it can either be really high in no difference, right, in which case you want to just switch rapidly back and forth. So the golden rule is, if you feel intensity, move away from it. Intensity of any kind. That's the rule I work on. You know, it's not a no pain, no gain therapy. You know, so if someone starts to feel stuff ramping up physically or emotionally, switch away from it. I have some clients who have been through some pretty major traumas, and as soon as they cover an eye, they'll stop breathing for a second. Not for a second, I mean, they'll stop breathing until we get over to the other side, and they sort of loosen up again. So you can get some pretty intense, but if there's nothing and the event is sort of questionable, maybe it was a little upsetting, maybe it was a little irritating or frustrating, but it's not traumatic, then you probably won't get much difference. But we've done lots of training workshops, and don't be thinking, well, because you as a group of therapists or educators don't get a whole pile of intensity, that some of the clients you work with won't. Because in my experience with most clients, they're getting some pretty significant kinds of things from this. The other thing is Audrey was alluding to a stuck place in the eye. We call those glitches, just for lack of a better word. It's like you're moving across the visual field and it just glitches. It just halts or hesitates or widens or narrows or blinks consistently in the same place in the visual field when the person's thinking about that particular thing or person or event or whatever. And what we have is a video clip. I'm wondering if we could show you this little video clip. This is a session. Audrey was working on public speaking anxiety. That was the issue, and I was doing we were just doing some exploration of this. And this is when we were back doing almost like EMDR with one eye at a time. But what you can see on this is the disbelief. It's like starting out on one side, the right eye, you see, oh, it's like a caricature. It's not a problem on this side. It's maybe 4 out of 10. It's not a big deal. And yet, when you see the movement tracking through that eye, you can see this glitch. You see the eye go through and it goes like that. And that's the place that Audrey developed some techniques to remove or integrate where we actually uncover the other eye and do what we call a glitch massage. And you can actually massage that blocked place out. And in my experience, not always, but it often corresponds to where the person's eye actually was at the worst moment of trauma. For example, I work with bank robbery victims where the gun went off at a certain point, and we'll be working with the glitch like this, and they'll say, where was the gun at the moment? Where was your, show me where your eye was at that point. And they just like, it's right there. And that's exactly where the glitch is. Same thing with car accidents. The moment of impact often, it's like right in exactly the place. I had someone I was working with on a hostage-taking thing, and she actually triggered on another follow-up event where one of her colleagues was making a comment and sort of doing the little mockery of the event, which then was triggering her. So I said, where was that person sitting when he was doing that? And it's like, boom, right there. And it was exactly where the glitch was, where this little skip, yeah.
Is there any correlation between right brain and left brain that one side of your brain is predominant, more creative? Is that
I think it's way more complex than that. I mean, and we could spend like probably the 2 hours going into the neuropsych. I have a little 12-page whatever sort of review of some of the main neuropsych findings with trauma, but there's definitely a brain lateralization that occurs in a post-traumatic state, whereby usually for most people the right brain, the right frontal lobes especially, tend to be more activated by the amygdala, which is the more intense emotional, physical stuff charge. So they have a closer association. And during even triggering of post-traumatic memories and studies, parts of the left brain, for most people, I'm making the generalization now because people are switched and all kinds of stuff, but left brain, the part of the brain that deals with speech production, the verbal part, the sort of stand back and observe and that sort of thing, is shut down. So is the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that puts an event into time context, there and then versus here and now. So you've got this huge adrenaline rush coming up with the trauma, and you've got the part of the brain that differentiates between here and now and there and then shut down, not totally, but certainly interfered with. And you've got the part of the brain, the anterior cingulate gyrus, that differentiates a real present threat from a perceived threat and also helps integrate the emotional and the cognitive parts of the brain. You got all three of those shut down or reduced in function, reduced in oxygen utilization or whatever it is you're measuring. And so what they found in some of these therapies, even after as little as 90 minutes or even 3 therapy sessions, like huge deficits in function of those particular parts of the brain restore. Like 90 minutes of of something like EMDR, like restores the anterior cingulate gyrus. from a 5 standard deviation deficit. So there's some pretty major things going on in the brain. And it gets pretty complex. I mean, in terms of the eye movement and the glitch stuff, we're just starting to explore. We're starting to do some studies on just beginning doing brainwave patterns with EEG and watching what's going on in the left and the right frontal lobe and that sort of thing during the therapy, and when the person focuses on the left and right and switches and things like that. So, in any case, we'll leave that and show you the little video clip so that you get a chance to see this glitch. So do watch for the glitch, the little stuck place, and be aware that this is not how we do the one-eye techniques now, okay? So as they say on TV, don't try this at home, kids, okay? What we pretty well never do now is moving the eye, like having the person move the eye while you have the other eye covered, because that invariably will trigger the glitches and the intensity will go way up. There's nowhere else for it to go. Whereas if you have both eyes open and you're working with that, you get, it starts to sort of integrate and dissolve for most people. Yeah.
Both eyes open but working with one eye.
That's right. Yeah. And often you'll see both eyes moving with the glitch, but you're focusing on one. And the glitches will not always be the same place and things in each eye. Some of the most intense glitches I've seen are the outer edge of the eyes, right out here. And the times I've seen those most is when someone's been grabbed from behind. They've been trying to look back and see, who's going and where their eyes, or where their head is being held down, and they're trying to see what's up there and trying to talk to the person or whatever. So, really, sometimes super intense glitches. And glitches, we're not going to show you glitches today, okay? I'm not going to teach you how to work. That's like the whole major training thing. But we're just looking at the switch and another technique we call the sweep, which is often useful for working with like headaches and things like that. One of the students I work with did a whole little manual for using some of these techniques with headaches, including migraines. So it's great stuff. So we'll show you that, but look at the believability. The whole, oh yeah, it's fine, not a problem. That's that dissociative kind of layer. It doesn't mean dissociated all the time, it just means dissociated pertaining to those emotions on that event. Okay?
Talking about a teacher who would be very hard.
Okay. Why don't we try the other eye? Okay? We're going to take a minute to get there.
It's like a caricature.
Okay. Again, I can get through this.
I can get through this.
Yeah.
Feel it more now.
Okay.
That's interesting. I can actually feel the fear more now.
On that side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is interesting to me because I don't think I ever really believed how scary it was. Now my throat's starting to tighten up.
Okay.
But she was very scary for me.
Okay. Okay. So that side of you think, experienced it but didn't believe it.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. Okay.
Because before it was like, this is no problem, she's just as old bad.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, my throat's starting to tighten up here.
Yeah.
And I could see those piercing eyes looking at me, and it was
Wow.
like,
Okay. Okay.
There was fear there.
Okay.
Right.
Maybe we should just work on the believability of that. Okay. So why don't we start in this eye covered and gradually, take this side, take the cover off this side, and we'll start to just deal with the whole, can you believe it? Can you believe she was that harsh or mean or scary? Or can we believe she would say those things to you, do those things?
No.
Yeah. Okay? Okay. So So we'll start by covering this side. Okay. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can you see some of the things she'd say or do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you believe she did that?
Feel it in my chest now.
Okay. Let's try uncovering the other eye. Yeah. Okay. Can you believe that?
It happened.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Okay, try uncovering the other eye. Can you believe it now? Okay. Good. Okay, take a break, take a deep breath. What are you getting? What are you most aware of in your body or on your emotions?
It was really hard for me.
Okay, just to go through that experience?
No,
or
that was
recall
really
that?
hard for me at the time, and I never, I mean, I always knew I was afraid of her, but I
Yeah,
didn't realize it was like torture.
okay,
You
okay,
know, she was very, very, very hard on me,
okay. Would you?
personally. you
Yeah,
know, just
yeah.
for, you know, as a human, it
Yeah.
was hard for me to
Yeah.
deal with.
If you think now again about the belief you had about yourself in that situation,
Mhm.
I am,
Did I say I was terrified? I was terrified. Yeah, I think I
That's
genuinely
still-
was terrified. No, kind of sorry for her.
okay.
You
So
know.
you're starting to get a little bit of that?
Yeah, she must have been a pretty sad human.
Okay, okay. Why don't we focus on that? Okay?
No, I don't want to, you know, like I feel for her as an adult, but she was very hard on kids.
Okay,
I think all the kids hated her.
okay, yeah.
So I'd rather just deal
Okay,
with what I'm doing
okay.
with her.
What part of this experience bothers you the most right now, just when you think about it?
Well, as an adult, I think it bothers me to realize just how hard that can be for kids.
Mhm.
But also the thought of her perfume. Honestly, it made me extremely lightheaded and felt,
Yeah,
you know, I
Yeah.
wasn't able to think around
yeah,
her.
yeah.
So
I wonder if it was a
Yeah.
physical reaction that made you feel
I never
out of
ever
control.
thought of that, and I often get lightheaded.
Yeah.
My hands get cold and shake
Yeah.
when I think about presenting
Yeah.
a new idea or new thought.
Yeah,
I always thought, I'm having an anxiety attack.
yeah.
I think I'm just,
Re-experiencing that.
this is how I feel when I walk through the bay
Yeah,
in the perfume department.
Yeah.
I feel lightheaded.
yeah, yeah. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's exactly what it is. It's a physical reaction, like a
I
recapitulation.
never would have
of
thought
it.
of that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, why don't you just hold on to, just take a minute again to try to connect to the part of it that still bothers you the most when you think about it. Might be an emotion, it might be the physical sensation, the numbness, the...
I still feel a little in my throat and my
Okay.
chest.
Should we focus on that?
Okay.
Does it feel like something you want to do with one eye, or you want to do both? What do you think?
I'll just try it with one eye.
Okay.
And see how that goes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
make
just
it-
real briefly and just see how I
Okay,
do that.
let's just
Okay.
cover that eye, and we'll
Okay.
try this, okay? You're doing really well. Yeah, good. That's right. stuff like that happens.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's so unnecessary and unfair. Yeah.
Try doing this with both eyes.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going on it, okay? We'll move right through it. Okay, remember that movie screen. You're standing behind the screen. You can see what's being projected onto it, but you're not in it.
I can go into it.
Can you? Okay. 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 Yeah. Well, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Okay. That's right. That's right. Okay. Can we stay with it? Good. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Stay with it. That's right. You're doing really well. That's right. You're right. That's right. That's right, and she should. You're right. You're right to be mad with her. That's right. That's right, exactly. You got it. You got it, exactly. Exactly. You didn't deserve that. At all. None of that. Good. That's right. Good job. You can do this. You can do this. You can get beyond this. So what you saw at the end there was what EMDR, right? Eye movement resensitization reprocessing. But what we wanted you to see was the glitch stuff, that little stuck place. And so often someone can't move beyond that little piece. It just keeps the whole thing stuck. The processing, the reflecting, the meaning, the stand back and get another perspective, the integration of the two sides. So sometimes we'll use that technique for massaging the glitches. If someone has differences in the sides, but they don't seem to be changing, the high one doesn't seem to be coming down, then we'll look for glitches, find them, and dissolve them. And often then both sides will come down.
And that experience probably hadn't been consciously. I always had to struggle to figure out what am I going to work with to do this video. So I thought of this teacher who had upset me a lot when I was a kid, but I honestly never realized that she was affecting me on a regular basis. And when I realized that she wore a very strong perfume, that information wasn't available to me. I just never thought of that. I mean, this is back when I was in high school. So when I made that connection, it was like then I could start to think, well, that lightheadedness and then my hands would get cold, that's an allergic reaction I have. But when I'd get anxious, I'd get lightheaded and my hands would be cold. And I thought, oh, when I get anxious, I get lightheaded and my hands would be cold. I just said, well, that's part of my personal experience. But it wasn't. It was a tie between being very anxious as a teenager and this allergic reaction I had to my teacher's perfume. Now, there was another piece of that we didn't show you on the tape, and that this teacher died. She was an elderly woman. She died while she was my teacher, and I felt terribly bad about it because I hated her and feared her tremendously. So here I show up for school one day and she's dead. And it presumably regressed me to the point where I was like, I felt guilty about hating her so much. So all this was a complicated emotional event that I was not aware of. So being able to take that experience apart was really very helpful to me. Because there are some parts of it I was completely dissociated on. I had not, when I covered one eye and thought of that woman, I really thought of her as being, oh, when I said a caricature, it was like she was a cartoon character. It didn't have any meaning for me at all. But over here, I could feel the fear and the dread and the nausea. And, ugh. So it wasn't recapturing the wholeness of my experience. I was able to give meaning to it, integrate it. and move on with it.
Mhm. So what you didn't see on the tape as well was what was the presenting problem. The presenting problem was public speaking anxiety, because we were going to be speaking at the International Conference on EMDR in Las Vegas. And Audrey was finding every time she even thought about presenting her ideas, she was getting numbness in her hands and arms and choking sensations, like, I can't do this, right? So that's what we started with, right? So what it was a trauma in that classroom, standing up to make a presentation, allergic to this perfume of the teacher, starts to feel woozy, starts to feel losing control, forgets what she's going to say, teacher gets mad, classmates laugh, there's like humiliation, there's like feeling out of control, overwhelmed, powerless, I can't make this happen, and then back to the seat. So that moment of trauma then stuck and associated with every other event where it was like, you will stand up in front of people and tell them about your ideas. It's like, whoa, it just triggered. But that one session released that. So it's just like huge what you can do in single or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 sessions. And I've got a video, which, depending on what you're most interested in, I have a video of a client with cancer, a young woman with cancer. In one session, we hit 4 targets, like a 1-hour session, 4 targets. So she went from being unable to even talk about her experience or cancer or anything without just bursting into tears. Like next session she came back, it's like a new person. And I'm not just, I mean, you have to see it. Like, like after a while, I have to stand back and sort of always, question, well, what's this about? And, can this be happening and stuff? Because there's major changes in single sessions, and, within an hour you can clear 4 or 5 things that were previously just overwhelming.
I think that having a good therapeutic technique is really nice. But for me, being able to lie in bed at night and think about something that stirred me up during the day and be able to explore that and gain pieces of meaning and understanding and awarenesses about my own experience is at least as powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we not only offer our clients, we offer to ourselves. Is just exploring our lives in a more meaningful, in a more full way. Because when something's stirred me up, and I'm lying in bed and I cover one of my eyes and I feel my stomach get tight, and then I look over here and I realize that I'm really angry. And over here I'm nervous. And over here it should really bug me. And over here I'm feeling scared. That's good information for me to have. That's information I can use or not use as I choose, but it's about the meaning of my experience. And that's a very common thing that I see in my clients, but in myself as well, is the anger scared. And we can theorize about the connections between the two or whatever, but I know that I'm going to be able to let it go and move forward better if I get mad and scared. The object is not to feel okay. The object is to feel connected and integrated and powerful within my own experience. Because a mad and scared is a whole different experience than scared and mad. Both outside my consciousness. I can work with this. I can work with this connected experience. Mm-hmm. To do whatever I want with that. I can continue and to lower my reactivity and to be able to say, well, that was an interesting event. Put it away. Or I can just be curious about what about that is so scary and what about that triggers me so much. And I'll get images of different people in my life, past experiences that I go, oh, that's interesting. When she said that, or she looked at me just like that, that reminded me, that's what that brought up. So it isn't about fixing my life. It isn't about fixing me. It is about examining and exploring and living a more in-the-moment life. Clearing shock, clearing denial, clearing the part of me that's just, oh well, just go to bed, just go to sleep. Just ignore that. So it's enriched my life, and I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. So we could do a couple of things right now. We could break up into triads, and you could try some switching. We could show you a second of the techniques, which is sweeping, which we use when someone gets let's say a headache, and it doesn't go all the way down with the switching, and you want to try to get rid of it. It's basically just tracking through the visual field, from the outside edge across to the other side of the nose and coming across and repeating that. Often you can see those little glitches as someone's doing that, and in my experience, as someone gets rid of that symptom, as the headache goes down or the pressure or whatever it is, you start to see their eyes smooth out instead of doing this or stuck or glitches or things like that. Their eyes start to move more smoothly. So we could do that. We could show you that. I could show you some videos of some other clients doing some of these techniques. Like this young woman with cancer. I have a part of a video of a woman who had an abusive spouse, and the target was thinking about her husband's face just prior to her husband's abuse of her, because he would get a characteristic look on his face, and specifically his mouth, every time he would go into that state that was abusive. And that's not uncommon, because often when people do that sort of thing, they're in a dissociated or another sort of state, and then they do, so it becomes a discriminative stimulus for what comes after. So what we worked with was her focusing on that mouth, what she called the flat mouth, and as you see, as we work with it, like in, I don't know, it's like 20 minutes, something like that, it clears. Like it's not a problem. She doesn't, the face isn't burning into her forehead every time she vaguely thinks about him, or he makes a phone call or something. It's gone.
When you take away the glitch, when you integrate the emotions on either side, you've taken away the dissociative aspect. Does that also take away the safety?
No.
Association provide for the person, because that's why they dissociate, because it helped them like a scar, right?
Yeah. In some cases, Audrey, you can talk about that too, but I was just going to say, with some clients, this is a question about does the dissociation, does it remove the dissociation, which then removes the sense of safety or the protection from something that might be overwhelming to them? Is that the idea?
Yeah, somehow it's, my feeling is that there would be, so that there's this integration, there's this knowledge, but unless someone's put it together, what are they going to do with this knowledge? Now, not only, at least when I looked, I thought I was dissociated, so I didn't feel anything. But say you've got someone who's a paramedic, who's dissociated all the hell because he's got to be that way for his job, and so that he can face all the stuff that he faces. Well, then how do you deal with that? If you integrate all these feelings, can he still do his job? Will it take it away from him?
Sure. Yeah.
Certainly as therapists, I mean, anybody who's working with people who are in distress, you get kind of stirred up, and we find our ways to distance from that. So if I'm integrated, all of my whole experience, am I going to live in a state of hypersensitivity? Right. That hasn't been my experience. In fact, what I find is that I work with very distressed individuals, and I'm finding it much easier to work with in the last 8 years than in the previous 20, because I'm more integrated with that experience. It's a more whole experience.